So we will continue with the zone segmentation. Okay, I have few examples that we can look at. Okay, actually, this is one of the easier things that can be done, right? Segmentation. So the first one, so we will go through transmission system, substation, or distribution, and then the ones that have renewable included in it. So we will take a bunch of examples. I have at least one in each category which is detailed. Okay, then I have others which are not detailed. I think you will get an idea. Okay, so if we look at transmission substation, typical, okay, where the process bus and a station was segmented. We have a process bus and we have a station bus. In some substations, as we said, there may not be any process bus. There will be only station bus. Okay, so the zones in this one, we will obviously, if there is a process bus, we will have zone 1, which will be merging units and IEDs. Okay, zone 2 will have the station bus, which could have RTUs, IEDs, even sometimes gateways or HMI. And zone 3 will be the substation demilitarized zone. Okay, we'll go to the details of this in a minute. And zone 4 is the control center. So this is typically the segmentation you can do in this type of substation. And then there will be conduits, obviously, connection between the communication connection between the zones. For example, zone 1 to 2, which is process bus to station bus, you will have goose, sampled values, and you could actually do a virtual LAN there, right? Conduit 2 will be from zone 2 to 3. Okay, how you will do this? Obviously, you can have a firewall there, right? And it will allow only MMS. That means client server communication type, right? Zone 3 to 4, which is substation DMJ to control center, okay, you will have a TLS, transport layer security there, right? So these are again some of the protocols. DNP3, obviously secured one, and IEC 104, right? Those are again the possible protocols through which the communication will happen. And the VPN will be IPsec type. I think we will later on, I'll give you some idea of different types of VPNs that are possible in this. But let's go into the details of this one. Before I start the next one, let's go into the details of that one. Yeah, so here, this is the same one with more detail. Okay, zone 1 will include the process bus zone. As we talked about, it will include merging units, protection relays, sampled value publishers, right? And goose publisher and subscriber, okay? And purpose is basically fast protection using IEC 61850 and sampled values. We are aware of that. Zone 2 will be the station bus zone, okay, which will include RTUs, station gateway, local HMI, synchronization server, if you are distributing the synchronization signal, and the station control. And the purpose there of zone 2, or the functionality within that, is supervisory control, SCADA protocol, and engineering access there. Okay, zone 3, which is the DMG zone, okay, it will include data concentrator, and this is the system log or the monitoring system that you have, and then patch repository, and then security monitoring sensors. So that's the demilitarized zone there, right? And the purpose is really for this zone is to act as a buffer between OT and SCADA, okay? And when you want to separate your OT network from anything, could be IT, could be SCADA, or wide area network, that's where you will create the demilitarized zone. And the access there will be very limited, going into the OT network. Okay. And then zone 4 is the utility WAN, which is the central control center, which will have SCADA master, EMS, DMS, okay, and any, historian or data, storage, or even the corporate or wide area network. That's why you need between this and your zones 1 and 2, you need a zone 3, which will be the demilitarized zone, okay? And then there will be conduits, okay, between various zones, okay? So conduit 1 is between zone 1 and 2, process bus and station bus, okay? And it's going to basically carry these type of messages, goose messages, sampled value, and how do you enforce it? By using virtual LAN segmentation, okay? And multicast filtering, right? You are going to restrict the traffic then to only specific VLANs as well as MACs, right? And then your second conduit is between the station bus zone 2 to zone 3. Zone 3 is the demilitarized zone, okay? So you will have a controlled firewall. Obviously, all conduits normally will have a firewall, and it will allow MMS reporting and any engineering traffic, approved one, right? And it will block all unapproved east-west traffic, okay? East-west is, if you look at I have a, we can go back this one, right? So this was zone 1 that we talked about, includes merging units and IDs, sampled value, okay? And then we have zone 2, I think, yeah, zone 2. Zone 4 is the control center, and then obviously zone 3 is the, zone 2 is not marked, that's zone 2 there. Zone 3 is the demilitarized zone, okay? So those are the conduits, C2 between zone 2 and 3, right? So if I go back to the details, this is what we have. Station bus to DMG, and then conduit 3 is between 3 and 4, DMG to control center, okay? It will only, allow, right, DNP3 secure authentication in case, you are using DNP3 or IEC 6870 for the, SCADA, right? And there can be deep packet inspection. So, and then there is a firewall, which is very strict whitelist. So again, the idea is to have a very strict separation between your OT area as well as any other area, IT or the wide area network and so on. Actually, we will later on see, the hierarchy. Which one is the easiest? Where you should start? If you have nothing in cybersecurity right now, where you should start? Actually, this is one of the easier things to do, right? Whether you have, you are using IEC 61850 or not, but that's how you can separate things. And then these are again the VPN paths between demilitarized zone and zone 4, which is the control center. Okay, there you will have a VPN, which is again, we will talk about this. This is the IP security there. Okay, and these are again various protocols and what encryption they use within the VPN. And the purpose is basically secure authenticated encrypted link for SCADA. Okay, so That's a little bit more detail about that. Okay, let's go back to the distribution one. Okay, we will take a look at that. So let's just start with the distribution substation. And this is again based on standard IEC 62443. Okay, we talked about that. So in the distribution center, typically you could have a zone 1, which is ID RTU zone. You could have zone 2, SCADA, HMI, and zone 3 is the utility LAN. Okay, so and the conduits are between zone 1 and 2. Okay, depending upon what protocol standard you are using, DNP3 or IEC 61850 MMS. And then zone 2 to 3, which is between local SCADA and utility WAN, okay, it's going to be optimized outbound only. Okay, there is no inbound traffic there coming. Okay, and then there is a VPN, okay, engineer access via TLS VPN. Here, we are not doing the IP6 VPN, we are doing the TLS. We are aware what TLS is, right? So that's another type of VPN that can be set up. Okay, but let's look at detail of that one. So this one here, okay. So zone 1, as I said, had IDs or RTUs. So what are um, devices are included in that? ID, RTU, any measurement units, protective relays, any other automation component, which is controlling your primary equipment, circuit breakers, transformers, anything that's controlling that. So you will include that within this zone 1, okay? And this is again, some of the, um, aspects you can use, what zones to create. So, it's becoming obvious what could be different zones there. But you could say, what is the criticality? Okay. So obviously you will include that in zone 1 if it is a very critical thing. Okay. If it is very high, in this case, criticality is high, and it will directly impact the operational process. Okay. What is the trust level? Okay. So obviously operational technology slash industrial control system type trusted domain. You could trust that domain there. Okay, what are the protocols that are allowed? Okay, DNP, IEC 61850, and so on. If there is a goose, it's possible, right? And what is the exposure? Only connection is to zone 2 through a conduit, which will have firewall, or you will have VPN or something like that, right? Actually, those ones are easy to set, okay? And then what are the security function? Role-based access, okay? Local role-based access, who has access to all those equipment in your zone 1. And you have to actually restrict. See, through communication, you can only contact this zone via conduit. Okay, but physical access you have to control yourself, right? Who has access to ID, who can change the settings, who will go and put a USB or whatever, right? So you have to control that there, right? So, and we will talk about device hardening. Okay, there is a standard, IEEE standard actually. I'll give you some idea how to harden your IEDs, right? Because that's again, within this framework, it's easy to set up the zone, but within the zone, what happens? I think that's something utilities have to, really take care, right? Who have access to these kind of things, and also patching and so on. And zone 2 is your local SCADA or HMI zone. Okay, so what does it include? Local server, gateway, human machine interface, that's another one, you know. So who has engineering workstation, if physically on site and not remote. You are not connecting remotely to Zone 2, right? And then there is a data concentrator or protocol conversion, if there are any. And what are the key characteristics? It's supervisory control or arm handling, okay? It's again trusted OT management environment, right? And the interface is only northbound conduit to utility WAN, right? And there is a one southbound. It's in the middle. Up, you are going north, you are going to the utility band, and then you're going to your devices, right? So it's in the middle. And the security function there you will include is authentication, logging, anti-malware, and so on. All this configuration management, you have to include that in there in Zone 2. And Zone 3 is your utility WAN zone, okay, which is central SCADA EMS network management system. You will have operational data concentrator. These are again some examples. Dispatch center communication, right? Host. So relationship is it's external, okay, but trusted OT domain, and it will require strong boundary connection. It is external, but you know, interface, it receives only outbound initiated communication from Zone 2. That's the only information it can get. And then you will have enterprise level intrusion detection. We will talk about this tomorrow, okay? And also a little bit of SIEM, which is again management system, and it will have WAN access control. Okay, so now let's talk about the conduits between these, okay? So this conduit is obviously between Zone 1 and 2, conduit 1, okay? Um, so it will allow these type of protocols only, okay, DNP3 or IEC 61850. The directionality is bidirectional, but it's restricted to required control and monitoring function. You can actually set up like that, okay? So what is the security protocol in this conduit? Could have a firewall, okay, including the whitelisting, like what commands can flow through there. You can do that. You could have a packet inspection, which is appropriate to the protocol you are using, and monitoring and strict port and service minimization. You know, usually people leave the ports open, right? So you need to basically, you know, only the ports that are required, right? It will be very much strict, and you want to minimize the number of ports there. Conduit 2 is between Zone 2 and Zone 3, utility WAN and local SCADA, okay? It's a northbound conduit, which that means going up from Zone 2. So communication model is outbound initiated connections only. For example, Zone 2 to Zone 3. That's it. Okay. IEC 62443. Again, this is all based on IEC 62443. Okay. Unidirectional trust boundary crossing. Right? And the protocols are basically secure, SCADA, telemetry reporting, the story and upload. And again, you will have a firewall with, you know, default deny. Remember, trust no one. The default will be basically denying it until unless you prove that, you know, you meet all these outbound rules, and then you will be allowed. Okay. And there is a optional DMG zone you could have in there, right? And also jump host presence, depending on the jump hosts are the ones um, where you could actually, you know, go through without jump host presence. That means you can go from one zone to another zone without going over the firewall, right? So those, again, sometimes they allow that depending on the security level, okay? And then there is integrity monitoring on SCADA data flow. And then you could have a TLS or VPN when, if your WAN policy requires that. So VPN, firewall, all those at the conduit level you can have, okay? So remote access has to be via VPN only, okay, through a controlled remote access. So if somebody need to remotely access, right, and it has to be time bound. That doesn't mean you got the access and you keep it forever. You're going to basically, you have access for 1 hour. That's it. After that, it's gone, right? And those type of things can be set up in your VPN, okay? So authenticator engineering access for configuration, that's again role-based access, right? And what is the protection method? This is a TLS-based VPN, right? Not IPsec. You can actually work just with the TLS base. And the entry point, it terminates in zone 2, which we know. And or if you have a dedicated remote access GMD, right? If you have a demilitarized, usually in the distribution system, they don't have DMGs set up. And again, if your substation or that distribution system is extremely important, you may set up the DMG. These are just few examples. And some of the security functions are jump host and bastion enforcement, okay? We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, okay? What are they? So role-based access, enable, disable, and logging and monitoring, right? Those are again some of the, and you could have some, as I talked about, you could set up a DMG, right? Those are again optional extensions, okay? You could have a separate engineering workstation zone. You could create a zone, again, depending upon the requirement. If engineering people are going to access, frequently, then you may set up a zone for them, right? And then data diodes that we talked about, right? You could actually set up data diodes for data as well as control commands, right? So this is all it all looks like then, right? Zone 1 with field IDs, RTUs, and Zone 2, local SCADA, Zone 3, utility WAN, okay? And then conduits, conduit 1, conduit 2, right? So those are firewalls or VPNs, right? Very secure communication between them, right? Yeah. Because you do not want to include it in the field zone, right? This is the most critical zone, right? You're, yeah, they have access, but they may not be able to carry out all the commands. See, if you leave it, if you include it in there, right, then these people also have access to everything here. So now they have access, but they have to go through the conduit, which would be a firewall. So you will have a white list, right? Who has the access and what they can do, what kind of commands they can set up, right? So, so anything unauthorized will not pass through there. Yeah, maybe that's not the way it should be set up then, right? So that means you are basically combining these two zones together, right? Once you give these people access to everything, there's no point having a zone. I think that's what you are trying to say, right? Maybe that's not the best and secure way to do it, right? Yeah. if you want to change the configuration of ID, then you could do it, but then it has to be all role-based, right? Who can change it and all that, and then your firewall has to be programmed accordingly, right? So the thing is, you don't want anybody who is not authorized to come from here and do it. And that's why you have this firewall. You could set up those rules and also give role-based access only, right? So that means right now, I think the way you are describing, you basically have a flat structure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's there, it is a kind of a flat structure, you know. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think so that's again. So if you are, I don't know again the Indian scenario, but in North America, if you want to meet the regulations which are coming, okay, then you have to do this. You have to, show them that you have separate zones, you have proper conduits which are properly monitored and so on, right? So actually, once we are done with some of this material, I have a list of 10 priority things that you can do. If you have done nothing, you start from number 1 or go all the way to number 10, okay? And you will see that we have discussed majority of the technologies here, one way or another, okay? Remember the PKI, that's actually in the middle of the pack, okay? This is actually one of the easier things to do, right? You could actually set this up. Maybe I will do that next so that, we can have and then, um, you basically start with role-based access and so on. So I have a list of 10 things. I thought you will, put everything in perspective, what we have discussed so far. It will be a good idea to say, okay, what is the easiest to implement and what is the hardest? The hardest one to implement is, which are kind of in research phase and maybe eventually they will come, is the artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques. Okay, they are not easy to implement. They are the hardest one to implement, at least at this stage right now, right? But let's continue. Do you have more questions? Or you okay? Okay. Any more on this? And stop me if you have a question. We can, because the idea is I have a lot of material. Yeah, we will talk about that. Yeah. So when we talk about VPNs, I will mention. So IPsec, okay, just very briefly, because you asked, or maybe TLS we understand, right? We have done that. So IPsec in the local area network, see TLS is when you are going from one network to another, right? You have TLS, right? Or between 2 points, you have TLS. Within the local area network, TLS does not provide the security, and or you can't. It's very hard to implement. So what you do is you set up the security at the IP layer level, okay? Because so whatever happens at the IP layer, you are going to encrypt it and decrypt at the other end. Remember the 7 layer? Yeah. So at the IP, so within the local area network to provide that protection, you will use IPsec. Okay. And the idea is again, whatever data is at IP layer, you will take that and you will encrypt it and decrypt it rather, basically. Right? Yeah. So one more that I want to do, and then we will quickly go through few other examples, right? Uh, this is with the renewable. Yeah. So let's suppose we have DER solar plant substation, right? This is another, scenario that we can have with SCADA plus inverter network segregation. So what we will do is very quickly, I'll go through the details, just like the others. So we will set up 3 zones in this case, possibly. Okay, zone 1 will be the inverter cluster LAN, if they have a LAN or whatever system they have. So you will create zone 1 there. Okay, zone 2 will be the planter SCADA, and zone 3 will be the utility interface. Okay, and the conduits obviously will be 2 only, zone 1 to 2, zone 2 to 3. Zone 1 to 2 could be, Modbus or TCP with firewall. Allow list, zone 1 to 2, okay, 1 to 2, and 2 to 3 will be the TL's telemetry, because there you are mainly interested in, getting, what they are producing and so on, right? What your renewable data looks like, right? So you could have just the TLS telemetry to utility, okay? And then you will have the VPN, which will be the utility IP6 tunnel, right? So let's look at a little bit more detail of that one. Oh, I think I went too far. Yeah, right here. So obviously we are all talking about this standard, okay, when we talk about zones and conduits. So what it does is, by separating these zones, a dedicated inverter device zone, it sets up local SCADA supervisory and a utility connection, okay, and very strict conduits controlling Modbus TCP, telemetry, and wide area network access, okay. So what are the and you have a utility managed IPsec, okay? So which is VPN basically. Right now, I think we'll consider that as VPN. So what would zone 1 include? Zone 1 will include any PV inverters, power conversion system, controller, anything related to that renewable. Metering control devices, which will support the DER operation, okay? And then any local data concentrator, right? So criticality here is high because it directly affects your power generation and grid compliance, right? So, and trust level, it's a local OT trusted zone with very restricted access to it, right? And protocols could be vendor specific protocol depending on the inverter, right? Or you could have Modbus TCP for telemetry and control. And exposure, there is no routable access to utility network from here. And communication will go through zone 2 to via conduit 1, okay? And those are again some of the security functions that you can have, proper authentication and so on. And zone 2 is your SCADA zone, okay? Right? So which will include SCADA server, HMI, historian, plant controller, DR plant controller, protocol gateway, or any if there is an engineering workstation at that point, right? So trusted level, again, it's a OT supervisory environment, right? And interface is C1 to the inverter, C2 to the utility, right? And in this case, again, same kind of thing. Authentication, role-based any alarm event logging or secure remote engineering access, right? So zone 3 is obviously the utility interface zone, which will include utility telemetry receiver or DER interface. And this is the IP6 tunnel termination. So this conduit will have IP6 VPN, and then grid operator, SCADA, or so on. Okay. Trusted level in this zone 3, it is external. Okay. But at the same time, it's part of the utility. So it's kind of semi-trusted. Okay. Right. And so telemetry is basically from zone 2. That's the only one that's permitted. Okay. And then security function is enterprise security monitoring, WAN control, and so on. So the conduit 1, 2 conduits only in this case. Okay. Conduit 1 is, this is the protocol. We talked about that. So what are the security controls? Firewall, okay, that will only allow the lists, basically, right? So, and then minimum number of ports that you want. You don't want to leave any open ports. And then there is logging and inspection of Modbus transactions, wherever it's supported. You could log all, what actions were taken or what went through, okay? And then unnecessary commands restricted by role-based access, okay? It's bidirectional both ways, but again, limited by, required read-write points. Right? So that's conduit 1. Conduit 2 is between plant SCADA and utility interface. Okay, so it's a TLS secure transport. In this case, you are going to use just HTTP or MQTT. Okay, by the way, MQTT protocol they use in IoTs. Okay, we haven't talked much about that. Okay, it's outbound initiator from zone 2 to zone 3. Other way around, nothing happens there. Okay, so these are security controls. TLS, firewall, enforcing outbound only rules. Okay, data integrity, timestamp, and if there is any buffering that you want to do. And remote access, we already talked about. It's a utility IP6 tunnel. Okay, dedicated IP6 tunnel, which will form a secure wide area network. Okay, in this case. Okay, so this is again a little bit more information. So those are again 3, examples. I have more here with other different configurations that you can use, but again the idea is the same. Okay, depending upon what is the importance of each zone, what are security levels you want, you can create the zones and conduits, and that's probably the easiest way to set it up. Okay, so any questions before I move on? So no, 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 you can't jump through that. So you have to go via zone 2, because you can communicate to zone 2, for example, right? Obviously through a conduit. Not allowed. Yeah, you have to go to zone 2 first. You have to set up a system. If you want to do that, you have to set up a system so that you can go to zone 2, and zone 2 will forward that command. It's possible to do it. You have to set it up like that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So those type of things are possible, but again, you have to go through that. The idea is to limit the number of connections. That's the whole idea. behind this. So you have only one conduit between the zones, right? So idea is to basically limit the number of approaches. So it's like, there is only one road coming to IIT Roorkee, and there is a guard at that road. There is no other way to enter, right? So basically that's, similar idea behind it. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. So that's in zone one. That's in zone one. Yes. Yeah. So you can go through zone two and get that information. You need? Oh, fault recorder. Yeah. Yeah. So you can go through zone two. You can go through, or another way is to set up the virtual LAN. Remember we talked about virtual LAN, and you can include that component as a part of zone one. Although physically it may reside somewhere else, right? But as a part of virtual LAN, you can set that. Okay. There are ways of doing that. If that's the requirement, you could do that. You could either go through zone two, or you can make that particular workstation as a part of your virtual LAN. Yeah. 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 It's yeah. So what this does is obviously it, you know, every time you add security, it becomes restricted. That's basically what happens. Every time, and just even in our own personal life, we don't like when we are going, we don't like somebody to stop us and say, show me the papers or stuff like that, right? It's exactly same thing. It becomes restrictive, but it's necessary now, right? So, but there are ways of, for example, if there is something you want from zone one, then obviously you have to make that as part of zone, and apply the same rules that apply to zone one. Okay, make that as part of virtual LAN, and then that engineering workstation should not be connected to anything else. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So then you make that as part, right? So that it follows the same rules as zone one devices follow, and also it can only communicate with zone two via that conduit, right? So if you make that as part of that, so it's possible to do it. Okay. Any other questions before I move on? No, there's only one conduit. No, no, there's only one conduit. So remember the architectures we talked about, zone one and zone two have only one conduit. One conduit. Zone one is connected to zone two via one conduit. Zone two is connected to three via another conduit. And that conduit will have firewall or all kind of security there. DMG, yeah, yeah, yes, yeah, yeah. You are using the jump host. Yeah, so then it all, yeah, it all depends how much security you want to provide. Yeah, jump, we will talk about those. Yeah, jump host and bastion host, we will talk about that. Actually, next we will talk about that. Okay. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, why don't we? So I need my this one, this one. Okay. Okay, so while we are at this point, let's talk about prioritized list, you know, and then we will move on to um, the standard for IEDs, how you can provide security to IEDs. Okay, so these are again, I'm just talking about technologies, not anything else. Okay, because as we talked, there are ways, other things that you should do to provide security, you know, training, culture, and so on. I'm just strictly talking about technology here. And if you see priority wise, okay, in terms of ease of implementation, okay, segmentation, perimeter, and firewall, those are the easiest and high impact. Okay, and we have talked about some of these technologies already, right? So, and what is the rationale behind this? Okay, and this does address the legacy environment, right? Because right now, majority of the legacy environments have flat structure, right? So, they have a flat structure where you have SCADA, meters, protection relay, corporate IT, engineering laptops, and vendor VPNs, and so on. Everything is together, right? And as I said, this maximizes the convenience, but it allows the attacker to enter any one point in that flat network, and then they can propagate, go anywhere. Okay, that's why we are talking about the basic network segmentation. We will use firewalls, virtual LAN, demilitarized zone. So as I said, we have talked about all these technologies. All I'm trying to do is giving you an idea what what are the priority in terms of providing security, right? All these. So the key technology is firewalls, DMGs, right? So you could firewall between corporate IT, OT, control centers and substations, substation LAN, and external vendor access points also. You could have a firewall there. DMGs, for patch servers and so on, right? And then network zones, which is again protection, SCADA, RTU, and so on, right? So why it is easy to implement in a mixed environment, okay? Because it is obviously some work, but not, it involves routing and firewall rule changes, basically. That's what it involves. And can be rolled out incrementally, substation by substation, right? So this is one of the easiest technologies. And these are again typical steps that you will use. You will make existing logical and physical network flows, define the security levels, which should be easy because you know your system. So you can say, okay, this is zone 1, this is the highest priority security, this is zone 2, medium, and then you deploy the firewalls or VPNs, okay? And right? And if you have any cross-zone services, you could put them into DMG. For example, your workstation, right? Because that's a cross. So you can put them in a DMG. You could have a zone, demilitarized zone, right? So you could do that, okay? The second one, which majority of lot of utilities, as far as I know, I don't know again in India, uh, they don't even know what they have, what are their assets, right? I don't know the Indian scenario, but don't have a accurate up to date list of RTUs. They don't even know what operating system they are running, what version they are running of the operating system. That's again priority number two. After the June segmentation, this is again one of the easiest things to do that utilities can do. Okay. Um, especially after years of incremental grades. Initially, they may know, and then things are upgraded. They have no idea. So, right? So, asset discovery is another one, right? Um, and then traffic monitoring tools, okay, right? So, what are the key technologies that we can use there, right? Passive OT, so I talked about the firmware version, who is the vendor, what protocols they are using, right? That's another. And then centralized logging and your monitoring system. So you could see the logs from your firewalls, routers, and servers, analyze them, and see, if there is any unauthorized activity or suspicious activity that's happening. Okay, you could have Windows event logs from SCADA servers, and authentication and VPN log. Time synchronization is another one, okay, to correlate the events correctly. I think we use that in our system to find out what really happened, in terms of operation. But same thing can happen in terms of, monitoring traffic and security, right? Who sent the command at what time, right? What command? Is there a link to that at the same time something else happened, right? So you could use the network time protocol or precision time protocol there. Why it's easy? Okay, because sensors typically sniff traffic only, and so you could actually have sensors sniffing traffic, right? You could do that. And then logging agents, and some of these tools are available, okay, where you could log the events, in the network and so on, okay? So what are the immediate benefits? Visibility into unauthorized connections, unexpected protocols, or any set of devices that you will have. So, right? So again, you could start at the central sites and high value substations, right? You could start if you have nothing right now. And, right? So then some of the log information you can align with some of these. This is again a NIST standard and the NERC standard. I'm sure you have your own standards in this area. Okay. So the third one, in terms of priority, I have 10 of these. The third one in terms of priority is secure remote access. Okay, using jump hosts, VPNs, or bastion gateways. Okay, so remote access either by internal engineers or by external vendors, and this is actually a very frequent attack vector. Okay, that's how they use that. Either they get the information from vendors, or for example, we talked about vendor having access, it hasn't been revoked now, and here role-based access actually will be very good to use there. And so strengthening remote general doesn't require modifying anything, only the connection points, basically, right? So what are the key technologies there? So you are basically restricting access, okay? The VPN gateways, okay, which are dedicated to remote access, but separated from your corporate VPN, and then jump servers and hosts in the DMZ, okay? They are within the DMZ, okay? So users will log into the jump host, and from there you will, have controlled remote desk protocol or secure cell to OT asset. Okay, so those are again jump. So jump servers, they are, I think you asked that question. They are security critical used to provide controlled access to sensitive or isolated environment. Okay, whereas a Bastion host is basically again a very secure server that will enter as a act as a secure entry point, okay, to a private network. So they will actually sit at the edge of the network. Okay, so this is again, in order to get into the demilitarized zone, you have to go through some of these servers. Okay, so this is additional security that you have. Okay, you have set up the demilitarized zone, but in order to get into that, you have to go through some of these. Yeah, so this is additional security that you have. Okay, and then you have the just-in-time access, okay, which are temporary accounts or times limited windows, right? So you may give a temporary access to, say, a vendor for 2 hours or for 2 days or for 1 week, right? And so why it is easy? Because the change is focused on access gateways rather than refitting the individual IEDs, right? So that's again the third one, right? And now we are getting into, uh, authentication and authorization and account management. So that's again, um, weak passwords, sharing the same password throughout, right? Actually, we talked about the public key infrastructure and even password. Many IDs will share the same public and private keys, right? And many IDs will have the same password, right? So this is actually very weak authentication, okay? So strengthening identity and access management, that's what we call IAM, okay? And what are the key technologies there that are used is multi-factor authentication, which we are all familiar with, okay? Remote access to VPN or jump hosts, okay? Workstations or SCADA HMI, okay? There is central identity store, okay? Which is basically an active directory, which is integrated with the OT gateways, right? And you could use that along with firewall. And we talked about the role-based access control, who gets to do what, separate operators, engineers, and vendors and auditors, right? Separate them from there. And then password vaults, right? Why it's easy-ish, in a mixed fleet. So you have, Active Directory, lightweight directory access protocol integration, okay? It's only servers and gateways, not individual IDs, right? So that's why it's easy. You are, okay? So it can be again rolled out gradually, BPN or jump host, control center workstations, HMI. So at various levels, you can roll that out, okay? And then um, the fifth priority that you can do is hardening of SCADA hosts and engineering workstations, okay? Right? And the rationale is, even if you have your field devices, which are legacy devices, which, you know, um, which are fragile and, but many attacks, if you analyze the attacks, they are happening from Windows-based SCADA hosts, okay? There are very few attacks happening actually from IEDs, directly from IEDs. Only when, IEDs ports are left open or passwords are compromised for IEDs, or they are, very easy passwords and so on. But this is where it happened, right? So And if you harden these, is easier than replacing or upgrading every IED, right? Because you have fewer of these devices, so you could do that. Okay. So what are the key technologies that can be used in this? Only approved binaries can run. Okay. You can't run every single program and so on, right? And then antivirus and endpoint detection and response. Antivirus you should run. Okay. And then host-based firewalls, inbound, outbound connections. So again, these are easier things to do. Okay. And then USB control, because a lot of viruses come through the USBs, right? So, right. So host-based intrusion detection, um, there are some prototypes, but we talked about that. That's still not there. You have a network-based intrusion detection, but host-based intrusion detection is not there. So the ease of implementation in this case is because it's limited scope, okay? You have only fewer number of servers and workstations, so it's actually easy to implement. And you can test this in a lab environment also. You don't have to actually shut down your systems and so on, right? So the number 6 one is TLS, VPN tunnels, and IEC 62351. We talked about this technology. The first 5, we, those are actually technologies that are very mature and existing. And it's, again, more policies that you have to set up, okay? And segmentation is easy to do. But these are, again, some of the technologies we have talked about. So this is the PKI, and your IEC 62351 station, okay? So what are the practical technologies for existing systems? Okay, VPN tunnels, it could be IPsec or TLS tunnel. Okay, we already talked about where they should exist, at the conduits level, right? And and then we have field deployable crypto gateways, right? Those are, again, sorry, using TLS, and then you have the, your native IC. If you are implementing that, um, standard, then you have the support, all the supports for that. And this is a little bit, VPNs are easier to set up, but this public key infrastructure is a little bit more complex, right? We talked about that a lot already, right? At number 7, we have the intrusion detection system, okay? This we will talk about tomorrow in a little bit more detail. So there are 2 types, network-based or host-based. Host-based is obviously at the device level. Okay, network-based is at the network level. And the idea is to monitor all the traffic and look for any suspicious activity on your network. Okay, it could be rule-based. You could have a bunch of rules and saying, if I see somebody trying to access an ID multiple times, okay, and is unsuccessful, that means something is going on in that case, right? So, that's one simple rule that you could set up. And usually when they monitor the traffic, majority of the time on your network, you have an idea of the traffic volume, right? Majority of the time, that, approximately this much volume. Actually, I'm not sure if I will get time, but we did monitor IEC 61850 traffic in a substation. Okay, and from that uh, traffic profile, right, you could use that to define the rules for intrusion detection, right? You could say, okay, I'm not, if you suddenly see 15 goose messages, that means something is wrong. Okay, usually that doesn't happen in your substation. So things like that. Okay, you could have network based, you could have host based. Host based, our IEDs do not have the capability to do it unless you add additional hardware. They don't have the computing power to do it. Okay, so these are again signature based, or you could have anomaly based, right? And then the host based is basically, if you are able to do it, then um, as I said, right now they don't have. Those are again research based, research level IDs. Commercial ones are not there yet, right? So in this case, the complexity is obviously it requires deep knowledge of normal operation. I just talked about that. That what is your normal situation like, right? And then it will require the integration with the monitoring and then incident response process. But how do you respond after you find an incident or a malicious activity? Okay, you could start with a monitor only phase in a test environment, and then go from there, right? So you monitor it, understand the rules, understand the normal situation, and then from there you make the rules for intrusion detection. And by the way, there are actually a lot of packages now which are available. So you can set up intrusion detection systems fairly easily, okay? Fairly easily. It's not easy, but fairly easy, right? And then, as we keep going, it becomes more and more complex. Microsegmentation and software-defined networks are there. That's the next. And the key technology is there, software-defined networking. Rather than having switches and routers, you could, have a software-defined network. And on the fly, you can change the rules. And you can, right? So host-level microsegmentation, virtual machines, right? So that's possible also. And then dynamic access control, okay? So those are again not easy to set up. These things are not easy to set, but those are the key technologies, okay? So it will require mature asset inventory and traffic baselines, okay? And you have to, we are going to block some messages. So you don't want to block your legitimate message, okay? So legacy switches. So here, your some of legacy equipment may not support this software-defined network protocols that they are using, right? So, and then at number 9, we have advanced analytics, machine learning, and AI driven. I think Professor Walja talked about the work they are doing in this area. Okay, this is more at the research level. Okay, that's happening, but eventually maybe these technologies will become prominent. So now one thing is there, this quantum-based computing is actually, we talked a little bit, it's making all these previous technologies, kind of obsolete because you can break them, right, using quantum. But some of these techniques, they can't do anything about that, right? So, right, so machine learning based network intrusion detection, you could do that. And then behavior analytics, okay? You looked at the phasor measurements and how it could be, you could use that information to see if it is normal or not normal, right? Things like that. Okay. And then you could have a distributed framework. You could have multiple IDS, intrusion detection system, and correlate that information together. It's much more, complex technology. Okay. So, and right, um, tuning models, right? So you have to have that. It will require additional computing power, right? So that's again, more at the research stage. Okay. And then the last one is zero trust architecture and secure by design power system. That's actually the most transformational and the highest difficulty to implement. Okay, which is the long-term, which is the zero trust architecture and secure by design. The device itself will have built-in cybersecurity in that. But that's again, newer devices only. You are not going to have this in legacy devices. Okay. So zero trust for OT, okay, which is identity-centric policies. User X with device Y may issue command Z to relay R only under condition C, right? So you will set up all these for, every single device in your system who have access to that, right? So you're basically not trusting anything until unless all these rules are verified, right? And then it's continuous verification. And secure by design IDs and RTUs, okay? I will talk about the standard, IEEE standard. I think we will have time today to talk about that. And then we are talking about end-to-end encryption and integrity. And this is actually a little bit of research is going on, digital twin and resilient control, okay? So you could set up the digital twins and validate security configuration and also see how resilient they are to cyber attacks. So you could simulate. In a way, that's what you were doing, simulating cyber attacks and see if you can actually detect some of those attacks or not. Okay. This is the hardest one. Okay. And those are again some of the reasons. Okay, because it will require upgrades or replacement of many devices. It's a multi-year investment, and so that's, in my opinion, not utilities are not going to do that. But those are again the 10 priority levels. Okay, in terms of ease of implementation. Okay, so this is again, if you are really embarking on cybersecurity, then year 1, 0 to 1, quick wins are network segmentation, that's the easiest one to do. Passive directory, the first 4 that we talked about. Hard and remote access, right, to your servers. Okay, and then year 1 to 3, maybe it will be year 0 to 3, I don't know, and this will be maybe year later on, right? Again, depending on the utility, how serious they are, and so on. So these are, again, we talked about the, the middle ones, which is IEC 62351, right? And intrusion detection system and microsegmentation. And the other 2, which is the advanced analytics and software defined networks and so on, those are the hardest one to do. Okay, it will take, I don't know how many years by the technology becomes mature. But I thought before we move any further, it's a good idea to just look at where we are, and we have talked, majority of these technologies here, we have talked about that one way or another. But this is kind of putting it all together. That's where we are. Okay. Okay. Any questions on this? Yeah. Yes. We not necessarily. You can put them at conduits. You can start sniffing traffic at the conduits, right? Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. Unless so it's mainly for intrusion means coming from outside, right? So it has to come through that, right? So usually at the conduit level, that will be, we'll talk tomorrow about intrusion detection. That's where they will place them. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it does add, um, it does add, but should I say latency, or does affect to some extent the network itself, because you know um, you are basically sitting there, although it's passive, it's not active, it's passive, right? But it does impact the traffic, and that's where you have to test it, whether it will impact the traffic. But between zone 1 and 2, there you said there is not much traffic going on, right? So no, not that one. No. IEC, DNP3, DNP protocol. No, we don't have that. Then this folder, cybersecurity basics. No, basics we will not have. to talk about the gap. Gap number one, as we all know, it is the legacy systems. Okay, so many substations are still using 6870-5. There's no inbuilt support for encryption and authentication. Okay, IEC 62351 suggests gateways, which is not always feasible. So legacy system is a problem to apply this particular standard, right? And in the Ukraine, huh? Yeah, yeah, because gateways, you may not always have that in legacy systems. We're talking about, yeah, we're talking about legacy systems because you can't apply it. So this is one gap. And the standard does not give you any solution to that, right? That if you are applying this standard to legacy system, what do you do in that case, right? So it's basically, I would say, this standard is much more forward looking rather than trying to, integrate even the legacy system. So this is one of the problems with the standard, okay? Um, so actually in the Ukraine attack, they relied on the gaps in protocol protection, right? This is the one. Sometimes you use TLS, sometimes you use the secure socket, right? This one is not as secure as this one, right? So that's the problem. And actually, in one of the attacks, this was used also. Some devices were using SSL, other devices were using TLS, and they exploited that weakness there, right? And then there is weak key management. But it really doesn't provide the operational clarity. you know it does talk about key exchange, but there is no operational clarity how it's to be done and what are the restrictions and so on, right? So, and there is infrequent key rotation in practice, right? You should be changing keys just like password. You should be changing the keys very frequently. How frequently and so on, there is no operational clarity in terms of key exchange. So this is another gap, okay? And we talked about the key reuse exploitation. This is again an example of attacks that has, uh, you know, so they were using the single key across 100 plus IEDs, same private key, same public key, for any encryption. So So this is another one. Exploit an IED firmware went unnoticed for 6 months. Okay, attackers have access to IED for 6 months because there was no detection mechanism, right? So until and unless you have detection, you don't know that something suspicious is going on in your communication. Okay, so there is no logging or monitoring. This is again part of the previous one, uh, same one. There is no detection, and um, it's really designed for small to medium networks. Okay, as soon as you start adding thousands of DERs and microgrids, the complexity becomes huge. How do you manage all those keys and everything? It becomes very, very hard, right? And gap number 6 is there is no secure update framework. Okay, right? There is no secure framework for update. So you have manual updates, which are common, which are prone to errors. Actually, a lot of errors are created by the technicians themselves or people trying to upgrade the firmware. And this is why many utilities don't like to upgrade the firmware, because sometimes it creates more problem than solve, right? They will continue using, but then you may expose yourself. If it is a patch for security, then you may expose yourself, you know, uh, codes due to broad privilege, right? Because everybody has a privilege, so they could update the firmware in a device, right? So that's the. So gap number 9 um, is the vendor lock-in concerns. Okay, there is very little test bed or certification program, right? So that's again um, a concern. Gap 10 is no procedure for handling detected threats. IEC is not reactive, but is reactive but not proactive. Okay, so they do not have any procedure for handling detected threats. There is nothing mentioned. How do you handle that? Okay, that's again up to the utility because that's another area. Let's say you detect a threat. Okay, what are your procedures within the utility to handle that threat, right? So utilities have to actually set up the procedures and protocols. What should be done if there is a threat detected, right? So, but this standard does not give you guidance on that, okay? And then similarly, incomplete logging specifications, right? So there is no audit trail in this standard that is defined. That's again up to the utility to do that, right? And no tamper-proof Yeah, that's again some of the recommendations. So as I said, utilities have to start doing their own management and so on. Okay. So hopefully, because these standards are dynamic, okay, every revision they add something. Hopefully in the future, they're going to add some of those gaps, that have been identified, and then add wireless and IoT and so on, and even DERs and so on, right? So yeah. So anyway, any questions on this? So this is again just to identify that, every standard, doesn't matter what it is, they will always have some gaps. Okay. And, it's good to identify when you use them so that the future revisions of that standard can address some of these gaps for you. Okay. Yeah. So tomorrow, we will talk about the one I wanted to talk now, which was the standard for IEEE standard for IEDs. How do you secure IEDs, right? That's one. And we will talk about the IDS. Now, we have a choice. I want to ask you, do you want me to talk about auditing or that priority list, right? Especially from utility point of view, what is possible and what is the easiest to do and what is not possible. Okay. So if there are no questions, then we stop here. And today we are on time. We are right on time, 1 o'clock. Yeah.